There are only so many different facets of your own personality that you can get to, and you find your...
Paul Newman, cool blue eyes, sharp intellect, humanitarian heart. He wasn't just a movie star. He was the movie star. Loved by audiences, respected by peers, and revered by critics, Newman carried himself with a rare kind of grace. He wasn't loud. He wasn't boastful. He didn't chase scandals or headlines. And yet, everyone paid attention when he spoke. He was that rare figure in Hollywood who managed to balance fame with humility. But even a man as gracious as Newman had his limits. Beneath that calm exterior, there were lines you did not cross. And while he rarely voiced personal grudges in public, there was one name, one man, who triggered something much deeper than annoyance or rivalry. A man who stood for everything Newman privately despised. A man who challenged not only his screen presence, but his principles. The tension was never front-page news. It simmered behind the scenes. Quiet words exchanged on studio lots. Demands scrawled into contracts. Silent refusals at charity events. And when the dust settled, it was clear. Paul Newman didn't just dislike him. He hated him. More than anyone else in the business. And now, after years of whispers and studio cover-ups, the truth has finally surfaced. Tonight, we uncover the long-hidden feud between Paul Newman and the man who pushed him to his breaking point. This is the story of principles, pride, and the cost of clashing egos in the unforgiving world of Hollywood. It began not with words, but with presence. Two titans, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen, circling the same Hollywood orbit in the late 1960s and early 70s, both impossibly handsome, both with that rebellious spark, both capable of commanding the screen without saying a word. They were mirror images in some ways, but reflections warped by wildly different philosophies. Newman, ever the professional, came from a place of discipline and purpose. He took acting seriously, showed up on time, treated the crew with respect, and made it a point to use his platform to push for civil rights, political reform, and charity. McQueen, he was raw, unpredictable, and fueled by an ego that refused to yield. His backstory was tough, a juvenile delinquent turned Hollywood star. But with that rise came a chip on his shoulder the size of a soundstage. He hated authority, dismissed advice, and fought tooth and nail for dominance, on screen and off. When the two were cast together in The Towering Inferno, 1974, the studio was ecstatic. Two of the biggest stars in one blockbuster, box office gold. But behind closed doors it was war. McQueen demanded top billing. Newman had more lines. McQueen wanted equal screen time. Newman had already signed. McQueen insisted his character be just as heroic. Newman quietly fumed. Negotiations stretched into weeks, not over plot but over egos. When filming finally began, the tension was so thick the crew whispered about it between takes. Newman, the consummate professional, kept his complaints private. McQueen, meanwhile, kept score, literally. He counted how many words Newman had. How many stunts? How many scenes? He even asked for changes mid-shoot to even things out. For Newman, it wasn't just juvenile, it was offensive. He saw acting as craft, not competition. The constant nitpicking, the egocentric power plays, the unwillingness to collaborate. It grated on him like sandpaper on skin. And worse, Newman saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just about who got more screen time. This was about character, integrity. McQueen, in his eyes, had none. And though the press tour painted a rosy picture, with both men smiling and shaking hands, the reality behind the scenes was a cold, calculated dance of avoidance. Newman had worked with difficult actors before, but McQueen was different. He wasn't just a rival. He was a disruption, a storm Newman never wanted to weather again. As the cameras stopped rolling and the years moved on, the resentment didn't fade. It festered. For Paul Newman, the feud with Steve McQueen wasn't simply about who spoke first in a movie trailer or whose name appeared higher on a poster. It was about values. Newman had always lived by a personal code. Be kind, be fair, be useful. He didn't just act, he acted. On behalf of civil rights veterans, the underprivileged, he donated millions to charity, funded education programs, opened summer camps for children with terminal illness. He used his name to give back. McQueen, on the other hand, hoarded his fame like currency. He was notoriously self-centered, often refusing to attend charitable events unless paid. Newman once invited McQueen to a charity gala benefiting sick children. Not only did McQueen decline, but according to insiders, he scoffed at the invite, saying, "I don't do handouts." That one quote, confirmed by multiple sources years later, shattered whatever thin thread of respect Newman still had. To him, McQueen's behavior wasn't just arrogant, it was soulless. And that sense of moral revulsion followed Newman for the rest of his life. Biographers note that Newman rarely spoke about McQueen by name, but when he did, it was with cold finality. In private circles, he referred to him as the other guy, or simply him, never granting him the dignity of identity. Friends close to Newman say he would change the subject the moment McQueen was brought up, his jaw tightening, his eyes losing their usual warmth. There was no forgiveness, no letting go. The clash was philosophical. Newman believed that with great fame came great responsibility. McQueen believed fame meant freedom from responsibility. And when these two worldviews collided, the fallout was permanent. Even after McQueen's death from cancer in 1980, Newman never softened. He offered no statement, no tribute, no nostalgia. To him, McQueen's passing marked the end of a chapter he'd long since closed, sealed, locked, and buried. And while the world continued to romanticize the myth of Steve McQueen, Paul Newman carried with him the reality of a man he had come to view not just as a rival, but as the embodiment of everything wrong with Hollywood. In the years that followed the towering inferno, Paul Newman and Steve McQueen never shared a screen again, and that wasn't by accident. Newman had made up his mind. The tension during filming had been unbearable, the rivalry toxic, and the moral chasm between them irreparable. Hollywood producers, forever enticed by the promise of putting two icons on a poster, kept floating ideas for reunions, buddy dramas, action spectacles, even dueling westerns, but Newman shut every one of them down. He didn't argue, he didn't explain. He simply declined, and his silence said more than any press release ever could. Newman didn't believe in wasting energy on hate, but with McQueen, it wasn't emotional fury, it was calculated contempt. He saw McQueen's actions not as misguided, but as reflective of a deeper rot. The kind of ego that chews through every opportunity, every friendship, every ounce of goodwill in the room. And it wasn't just about being difficult on set. For Newman, the tipping point came off camera. In the late 70s, Paul had transitioned more and more into humanitarian work. His Newman's own brand was just beginning to take shape, and he was pouring his energy into it, not for profit, but for purpose. Every penny was to be donated to charitable causes, but he needed visibility. He reached out to a few big names to lend their support, including McQueen. It wasn't even about money, it was about association. Newman thought that if McQueen showed up at a benefit race or signed on to a public campaign, it would double their reach. McQueen refused, not politely, not with scheduling conflicts. He reportedly told Newman's team, "That do-gooder stuff's not my thing." That one sentence lit a fire in Newman that never went out. Not because of the refusal itself, but because of what it represented. A rejection of compassion, of decency, of giving a damn. Newman didn't need McQueen's fame, he had plenty of his own, but the principle cut too deep. After that, Newman made a vow to those closest to him. He would never speak McQueen's name in public again. And he didn't. Not in interviews, not at award shows, not even when asked directly. That wasn't just about silence. That was exile. And in Hollywood, where gossip is currency, Newman's refusal to participate in the mythology of McQueen was devastating. He let the world believe what it wanted to believe, but he never gave the feud the oxygen of acknowledgement. McQueen died in 1980. Newman didn't attend the memorial, didn't send flowers, didn't issue a statement. Journalists asked him for comments. He declined every time, but privately the bitterness was raw. One of Newman's closest friends, screenwriter Stuart Stern, would later admit that Newman considered McQueen to be a great actor who never grew into a decent man. The contrast was glaring. Newman spent his final decades giving away hundreds of millions of dollars, funding hospitals, camps, and educational programs. McQueen, by contrast, was remembered for fast cars, short tempers, and unresolved grudges. One man aged into a legacy of purpose, the other into the stuff of Hollywood legend, with all the flaws intact. You're finding this story eye-opening. Take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment below. What's your favorite Paul Newman film? Your support helps us keep bringing you the untold stories behind Hollywood's most iconic faces. Let's uncover the truth, together. When the final chapters of Paul Newman's life were written, they didn't focus on drama, scandals, or grudges. They focused on his soul. The man who graced movie screens for over 5 decades died not just a Hollywood icon, but a humanitarian legend. His Newman's Own Foundation had given away over $500 million by the time of his passing in 2008. He had built hospitals, funded countless charities, and launched camp programs for children with cancer. And still, he remained humble, insisting his face not be on his products, refusing to take a salary, and brushing off praise with that same sly smile that had charmed audiences since the 1950s. Yet, amid this towering legacy of grace, there remained one ghost in the room, Steve McQueen, the man who, even in death, Newman would not honor. That silence wasn't born out of pettiness. It was a deliberate choice, an indictment without words. In Newman's eyes, McQueen had violated an unspoken Hollywood code, the obligation to use power responsibly. It wasn't just that McQueen had been rude or demanding or obsessed with billing. Those things Newman could tolerate. But to Newman, McQueen had crossed a deeper line, one that cut at the very core of his beliefs. He had seen the cost of fame and refused to pay it forward. He had taken everything and given back nothing. And that, in Newman's book, was unforgivable. Perhaps that's why, even decades later, Newman's children and close friends still mention the rift in reverent tones. They knew it wasn't just a petty celebrity feud, it was a matter of character. Hollywood has always been a town that forgets quickly, forgives easily, and glamorizes dysfunction. But Newman never played by those rules. He didn't need the headlines. He didn't need the last word. His life was the last word. He let the work speak for itself. And in that silence, in that calculated absence of reconciliation, Paul Newman made a statement louder than any red carpet feud could. He reminded the world that values matter, that kindness matters, that who you are off camera defines who you truly are. Steve McQueen, for all his legend and mythos, never earned that kind of quiet respect from Newman. The bitterness may have been restrained, but it was deep. Even when younger actors praised McQueen to Newman in later years, he would simply nod and shift the conversation. Not out of jealousy, but out of disappointment. The world remembered McQueen as the king of cool, but Newman remembered the man who, when asked to help terminally ill kids, said no. That memory stuck like a thorn. It hardened over time. And so, as Newman aged gracefully into a respected elder statesman of cinema, his silence became his sharpest blade. He didn't need to write a memoir exposing McQueen. He didn't need to lash out on talk shows. All he had to do was nothing. And that nothing spoke volumes. Because sometimes when a man of character draws a line, he doesn't do it in anger. He does it in principle. In the end, Paul Newman hated Steve McQueen not because of ego or envy, but because of what he represented. A man who had all the power in the world to do good and chose not to. And in a world where actions matter more than fame, that was something Paul Newman could never forgive.